How breath control can change your life. A systematic review on psychophysiological correlates of slow breathing. This is printed in Frontiers in Human Neuroscience, 2018, and published in the National Library of Medicine, National Institute of Health. Abstract. Background. The psychophysiological changes in brain-body interaction observed in most meditative and relaxing practices rely on voluntary slowing down of breath frequency. However, the identification of mechanisms linking breath control to its psychophysiological effects is still under debate. This systematic review is aimed at unveiling psychophysiological mechanisms underlying slow breathing techniques, less than 10 breaths per minute, and their effects on healthy subjects. Methods. A systematic review of Medline and Scopus databases using keywords related to both breathing techniques and to their psychophysiological outcomes, focusing on cardiorespiratory and central nervous system, has been conducted. From a pool of 2,461 abstracts, only 15 articles met eligibility criteria and were included in the review. The present systematic review follows the preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analysis guidelines. Results. The main effects of slow breathing techniques cover autonomic and central nervous system activities, as well as psychological status. Slow breathing techniques promote autonomic changes, increasing heart rate variability and respiratory sinus arrhythmia, paralleled by central nervous system activity modifications. EEG studies show an increase in alpha and decrease in theta power. Anatomically, the only available MRI studies highlights increased activity in cortical, example prefrontal motor and parietal cortices, and subcortical, example pons thalamus, subparabrachial nucleus, paraguatal gray, and hypothalamus structures. Psychological behavioral outputs related to above-mentioned changes are increased comfort, relaxation, pleasantness, vigor, and alertness, and reduced symptoms of arousal, anxiety, depression, anger, and confusion. Conclusions. Slow breathing techniques act enhancing autonomic, cerebral, and psychological flexibility in a scenario of mutual interactions. We found evidence of links between parasympathetic activity, CNS activities related to emotional control, and psychological well-being in healthy subjects. Our hypothesis considers two different mechanisms for explaining psychophysiological changes induced by voluntary control of slow breathing. One is related to a voluntary regulation of internal bodily states, interoception. The other is associated to the role of mechanoreceptors within the nasal vault in translating slow breathing into a modulation of olfactory bulb activity, which in turn tunes the activity of the entire cortical mantle. Introduction. Rationale. Breathing is intimately linked with mental functions. In the millenary Eastern tradition, the act of breathing is an essential aspect of most meditative practices and is considered a crucial factor for reaching the meditative state of consciousness or samadhi. The breath is called prana, which means both breath and energy. Example, the conscious field that permeates the whole universe. Pranayama, literally stop, control. And also the rising expansion of breath, is a set of breathing techniques that aims at directly and consciously regulating one or more parameters of respiration. Example, frequency, deepness, inspiration, expiration, ratio. Pranayama is primarily related to yoga practice, but is also part of several meditative practices. A growing number of scientific studies in the field of contemplative neuroscience are reporting accurate descriptions of mental and somatic effects elicited by meditation. The large number of published studies has led to the need of reviews and meta-analysis with the aim of eliminating possible confounding factors stemming from the heterogeneity of the investigated meditative techniques, differences among experimental designs across studies, and the overuse of subjective assessments in meditative effects evaluation. The purpose of these scientific efforts is threefold. 1, building a shared and standardized taxonomy of meditation techniques. 2, identifying psychophysiological correlates of meditation and meditation-related practices. And 3, assessing the effectiveness of meditative techniques as treatments in different preclinical and clinical conditions. It's commonly acknowledged that breathing techniques are profoundly intermingled with cognitive aspects of meditation. And in Eastern culture, their role for achieving altered states of consciousness is undisputed. A common belief of Western culture is that breathing control has beneficial effects on health status, such as wellness, relaxation, and stress reduction. Nearly 1 million results Googling the keywords pranayama and wellness or stress. Nevertheless, Western science has paid little attention to the investigation of the effects of pure breathing control on neural correlates of consciousness and on specific mental functions. Returning on meditative practices, the main issue in unveiling the basic mechanisms underlying their effects is to disentangle those related to breathing control from those associated with non-respiratory cognitive components such as focused attention and mental imagery. To our best knowledge, only 10 dedicated reviews tackled the effects of pranayama without succeeding in the identification of common psychophysiological model. Some authors have even attempted at modeling the effects of pranayama, but a general consensus on the identification of the psychophysiological mediators that link pranayama to its beneficial outcomes is still lacking. Other authors focusing their attention on the benefits of pranayama in different pathological conditions, such as asthma, hypertension, insomnia, anxiety, and depression, involuntarily added further confounding factors for the identification of pranayama's basic mechanisms. The main issue is the lack of consistent knowledge of physiological mechanisms leading to the beneficial effects of pranayama, and from a clinical standpoint, their interaction with pathophysiological ones underlying the above-mentioned diseases. In Western culture, breathing techniques were developed independently from any religious or spiritual belief or purpose, and nowadays are mainly used for therapeutic aims. Example, biofeedback, progressive relaxation, and autogenic training. These breathing techniques are often referred to as paced breathing and are based on slowing down the breath frequency. Paced breathing has been associated with relaxation and well-being, while fast breathing has often been mutually linked with anxiety and stress. To our best knowledge, both pranayama and paced breathing. No systematic review focusing either on their basic mechanisms or on their effects in healthy subjects has ever been published. The aim of this review is the identification of common psychophysiological mechanisms underlying the beneficial effects of slow breathing techniques. By systematically reviewing the scientific literature, only studies involving healthy humans, avoiding the possible confounding effects due to pathological conditions, and dealing with the voluntary modulation of breathing, pranayama and paced breathing were included. It is in fact crucial to distinguish between slow breathing techniques and other techniques that simply direct attention to the act of breathing, example, breath awareness and breath counting, or slow down breath as a consequence of other attentional practices, example, transcendental meditation and yoga nidra. Studies based on self-report instruments alone were not included, as their reliability is severely weakened by the absence of objective measures, a major and common problem when dealing with contemplative sciences. We focused on studies investigating both changes of physiological parameters related to central and/or autonomic nervous system activity in slow breathing technique trials and their relationship with behavioral outputs. The physiological parameters taken into account in the systematic review are brain activity, investigated by electroencephalography, EEG, and functional magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, and autonomic activity, studied by heart rate variability, HRV, and respiratory sinus arrhythmia, RSA, and cardiorespiratory synchronization. To develop an effective search strategy, we adopted the Population Intervention Comparison Outcomes and Study Design, PICOS, worksheet. Conclusions. We found evidence of increased psychophysiological flexibility, linking parasympathetic activity, CNS activity, related to emotional control and psychological well-being in healthy subjects during slow breathing techniques. In particular, we found reliable associations between increase of HRV power and LF power, increase of EEG alpha and decrease of EEG theta power, induced by slow breathing techniques at 6 breaths per minute, and positive psychological behavioral effects. This evidence is unfortunately weakened by the lack of clear methodological descriptions that often characterize slow breathing techniques literature. Further studies are needed to unambiguously assess these links. Only few authors have attempted to systematically describe the psychophysiological effects of slow breathing techniques, and a few number have attempted to relate them to meditation practice. Breath seems to be confined to an ancillary role when compared to other important mechanisms, such as cognitive and affective ones. Finally, more research is needed to disentangle the pure contribution of breathing in a variety of meditation techniques. As stated by Nash and Newberg, different methods, example attention-based and breath-based techniques, could lead to similar states. We herein proposed a brief checklist that could help to improve research on this topic. And in our opinion, it's possible that certain meditative practices and slow breathing techniques share up to a point similar mechanisms. Some converging data exists regarding the mutual relationship between HRV, RSA, theta, and alpha EEG bands activity, the activation of cortical and subcortical brain areas, and positive psychological and behavioral outcomes. In addition, the role that nostrils, and specifically the olfactory epithelium, play during slow breathing techniques is not yet well considered nor understood. There is evidence to suggest that there is involvement with this nostril-based breathing.